To Breaking to Data. Today we have Felicia Ruppberg, and Breaking to Data, we're a community of data-driven experts and professionals who are really interested in kind of opening up this field and bringing in others and sharing our industry knowledge and tips with you all. And we have a great speaker today. She's been at Spotify for a few years. She has a lot of experience in different, aspects of the industry, and we're really looking forward to having a great discussion with her and getting into some of her background and some of her tips for getting into the industry and succeeding. If you want to give like a quick bio on yourself, catch people up.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me. So my name is Felicia. Currently a data scientist at Spotify. I've been here for about 3 years. Before I was a data scientist, I was actually in FP&A, which is like on the finance team as a senior financial analyst. And before that, I spent 3 years at Accenture doing management consulting.
Yeah, that's great. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat. Today will be kind of more of a discussion, but let me dive in with some questions. So kind of starting things off at the basics. Why data? What drew you into, I noticed you studied math, where did that interest come from? And when did that dream kind of materialize?
Yeah, so kind of a few different things. I think that senior year of high school, I took AP Stats, and I really enjoyed it, even though it was a surprisingly difficult class, given the way that my professor had taught it. I just really enjoyed the ability to use like numbers and quantitative analysis to better understand people. So like I did my like final project, I remember, on like divorce rates and what influenced divorce. And this was like a notoriously super hard teacher, and I actually had him previous years for like trig and pre-calc, and I did not do well in those classes, and he didn't like me. But after my final project, he was like, oh, I feel like you have kind of like a knack for this. I think you should pursue it. So that partially inspired me to kind of dig into math more and stats when I went to college. I think also slight influence of my parents. My parents are from the Soviet Union, and they are very much like, math or science or medicine, engineering. So partially that as well. But even in college, I really enjoyed the stats class I was taking. And I was also double majoring in cognitive psychology, which is definitely not as quantitative, but there's still that like research method, statistics focus. So really liked kind of the blend of the two. And I actually didn't know about the term data science when I was graduating college. So I graduated Vanderbilt in 2016. And I had been thinking about, due to my parents, like the field of actuary. It didn't seem like exactly what I wanted to do, but like it was in that realm. So I was interning my junior year summer at New York Life Insurance Company, and actually wasn't on the actuarial team because it was super competitive. So I didn't get onto it. I was like on a technology team, but there happened to be a Vanderbilt alumni from Accenture that was there, doing a transformation project, and he was like, "You should look into consulting," which I hadn't heard of before. But I was like, yeah, like why not? And so interviewed and ended up getting my first job with Accenture. And even there, like from the beginning, like what appealed most to me was like the use of data. So it's like you would go into client site and you would like talk to people and interview stakeholders and kind of quantify everything that was going on. And then you would say, okay, well, we need HR data, like we need talent data, we need your finances. And so you kind of get it from all these disparate sources, and then, try to use like less advanced modeling techniques in data science, but still some like modeling to kind of come up with like, oh, these are the strategic opportunities that would be interesting for you guys to do. This would be like the net present value of them. This is the impact it would have. So I was just really drawn consistently to like numbers and quantitative analysis, and really using that to drive strategy and drive impact. And around like a year or two into my tenure at Accenture, I started hearing this buzzword data science and machine learning, right? That's like when things were getting like popularized. I was like, okay, like this is interesting. Like, let me look into it. So I got onto our internal data science team at Accenture, and that's where I got like my first real kind of exposure. But I sort of realized that if I wanted to pursue data science a little bit more seriously without kind of spending so much time after work, because consulting can be really grueling with the travel, like learning skills that I would need to go to like a tech company to really do that. And I loved Spotify as a product, so I was like, I feel like their data would be super interesting. Like
Mm.
that's like around when I applied was when like the first time that I ever had Wrapped come out for me. I don't know if it may have launched the previous year, but I think that was like when I had just gotten Spotify. And I think I was just kind of like, wow, the power of data is so interesting. Like I remember looking at the like playlist I was making, and at the bottom it'd say these are songs that sound like this. And I was like, wow, like how are they coming up with that? So I think it was just like the kind of like fascination for data has always been there. And then just exposure to really the product side of it, as you kind of get older and become like a consumer of these products, was what really drew me to it.
Wow, it's so cool. There's so much to like dig in there, but I want to start with Spotify Rap because like I'm very interested in that. I know like everyone, it's always a huge thing when everyone gets their Spotify Wrapped, and I'm always like fascinated. It's like really fun to kind of see that personal data. But can you share any insights? Do you like work on that, or is that something that that you like see how the inner workings or?
Yeah, so I haven't had the opportunity to work on Spotify Wrapped
Mhm.
for consumers. I've been more tangentially close to Spotify Wrapped for artists. So I don't know if a lot of people know, but Spotify, it's not just kind of like a marketplace for users, it's also a marketplace for artists. So we have something called like Spotify for Artists, where artists and their teams can sign up. And if you can imagine what their Wrapped looks really similar to ours, it's like these are the number of fans you have, like these are where your most loyal fans are from. So stuff like that. But a lot of it, I've definitely worked with a lot of the data that's like used for Wrapped, and that's my favorite part from a data perspective about Spotify. And I think this is true of many tech companies that might not be true for consulting, is that you have access to like all of the data. So
Mm.
I know exactly what data sets are used for Wrap because I'm using them for my own analysis or for my own dashboards. But yeah, it's like you mentioned, there's like user data, and kind of work with the creative teams to figure out, okay, what do we want to show from a design perspective, and what kind of vibe do we want to put out, like what do we want to reuse from last year versus come up with that's innovative. And then you kind of define like the data requirements for that, and then just like go into the data and dig it up.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool. So I guess it's really different than Accenture, right? Because like Accenture, you had to like hunt down the data yourself, and at Spotify, you just have access to this amazing treasure trove.
Exactly. I think that's the thing with consulting, is that you go to different clients. So it's not like you have, oh, here's like a repository of all the Spotify data. It's just
Mm.
like you're at this client site, you sign NDAs, like you're working on their systems, on their servers. Like many times, they might just have like CSVs that you have to pull in, into your own like database or into Python yourself, versus kind of having like a dedicated infrastructure like the way a lot of tech companies have.
Gotcha. And kind of on that note, we have a question about going from consulting to data science. Is there any like, was there a difference? I assume day to day was very different for you. Was there any other major changes?
Yeah, so definitely there's a lot of changes I think from a cultural perspective, but so I just to reiterate, like I didn't go directly from management consulting to data science, and I knew that I personally wasn't going to be able to spend my weekends learning the coding skills I needed. So I think it's like how well you know yourself. Like if you are motivated enough to do that, then I think you can transition pretty smoothly, but I knew I wasn't. So I was like, I need to find a role that kind of utilizes the skills I have or use in management consulting, and then
Mm.
but have it be at a company that's data driven, because like by virtue of being data driven and having democratized data, like you will just be forced to learn some of these skills. Um,
Mm.
and so that's kind of exactly what ended up happening. Like I joined the finance team, and all the data is in SQL, and I'm like, hey, well, I don't really know SQL, so gotta learn it. Gotta learn it because I said I know it.
Yeah.
Or like I know it the way like anything like in school, but it's
Mhm.
different when it's a day. But from like a day to day, it's definitely, I think Spotify just in general has really good work-life balance on most of their teams. So I
Mm.
think that compared to consulting, which is really project dependent, like the hours I think are better because you're not really beholden to like external stakeholders. It's a lot more like internal, unless you're on the finance team, because then you're kind of beholden to like earnings.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a public company at least.
That's good. I think the work-life balance is like, not talked about enough, but definitely like a huge plus of moving to that field. And kind of following up on like, learning and kind of breaking into different aspects of data. Jim is asking, kind of going from like a liberal arts degree into data science. Do you have any kind of like general tips? Because I know that you said like you like the boots on the ground approach to like just getting in there and learning. But were there other things? I know you also have a maths background, but were there other things that like you think are, really vital for people who maybe don't have that background to get into this?
Yeah, and I think and first of all, like if anybody wants to reach out, like you reach out to me on LinkedIn, like I'd be happy, or email or whatever. I'd be happy to like help, because I really do think that a tailored approach, depending on like what kind of learner you are and like where your skill set is like the most important. Like I don't think it's like a one size fits all solution. I mean, I know for me personally, like I tried to do like data camp, and I tried to do like tutorials. Like it just like wasn't sticking. And I think a lot of people recommend like doing a side project, and I definitely think that that is super useful, but I just didn't feel like I was gonna have the motivation to do that. So I think it's like knowing yourself. And I really don't think that I don't think that the approach of getting a tangential role at a company where you believe you have the opportunity to grow into a data scientist is a bad idea. Like I think it's also a really good idea because like one might think that they really like data science, but in fact, it's something else that's interesting to them. And so having like a hybrid kind of role initially can really test out what elements you like or not. But yeah, and if anybody wants to reach out, like I could send links to certain tutorials or posts or videos that I think are super useful. But I know in reality for me was, like you said, the boots on the ground approach, just kind of getting in there. But I think that being in consulting and like hearing about data science and stuff, especially because you don't have like big data and servers, like I didn't know SQL was like a useful skill. Like I thought it was like not really something that that was important. But I've noticed for every big tech company that I've spoken to or interviewed with, if that's what you're interested in, that's like the number one skill.
Yeah, same. Like I use SQL as my most used language. I'm a machine learning engineer, and so same. I was expecting like a lot of Python, but yeah, especially for like huge databases, there's just a lot
Yeah.
of. But it's kind of fun now because it's like putting together a puzzle with those long like nested queries, and it's like
Yeah.
lines long. But it's definitely something that I think SQL is fun to kind of learn boots in the ground, because like that's it's also kind of specific to whatever your client's data or your company's data is, but yeah, no, that's a fun
Yeah.
approach. But oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was saying, well, first of all, I think it's interesting that machine learning, I anticipated, see, and this is my ignorance on the machine learning field, I anticipated machine learning engineers probably don't do any SQL and they only do Python, but
Yeah.
clearly that's not true. But yeah, I think SQL is really good for boots on the ground. I think,
Mhm.
and my friend who's a software engineer at Meta, he always says like Python is much less boots on the ground, and he'll make fun of me sometimes and be like, you're missing um, very basic like object oriented programming skills that make it a lot harder for you to code. So he's always like, you should really take a course in that. So I guess if people are going to take a course, probably Python are better, and SQL you kind of just like learn on the ground.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that actually goes back to something that you were talking about a little bit earlier about like, the jobs under the data science umbrella and how there's actually a lot of different like job roles look very different. Data engineer versus machine learning engineer is like you have, complete different skill sets there. But yeah, I was curious, do you have any tips for people that like are maybe getting started on like roles that could lead to other things or just things to keep in mind when evaluating like different positions within data?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that I can speak maybe better to like the larger tech companies or even like consulting more than I can to startups. And I would love to hear someone's perspective on startups, because I think maybe it might be a little bit different. But I feel like for tech companies, for example, I think that roles like um, roles like, well, the obvious one like data analyst or like for example, at Spotify, we have like publishing analysts, like legal analysts, like these business analysts, like the analysts in the job title. And like it might not seem like data science, but if you look in the description, like if it feels quantitatively minded, then that's going to be important for the role. And if anything, if you really want to learn data, like you'll probably stick out because you might be on a team of less kind of eager of people that are a little less eager to like break into that field. So, you know, they might be like, oh, I'll take the presentations, you take you kind of take more of the data stuff. That's kind of what happened in when I was on the finance team. I kind of like immediately was like, I'm gonna take all the SQL projects, and nobody like had any problem with that because they didn't want
Yeah,
them.
they
So
don't want. Yeah.
exactly. So I think roles like that, I think again like anything in finance, even like biz ops, like I think when you're at a company and like a Spotify or like a Facebook or like an Amazon, sales, like all of these roles require a technical component. Like when I was on the finance team, I was on the ads finance team, and we worked a lot with the sales team essentially. And it would have benefited all of them to know SQL well and to know data well. And if I know a lot of people that were like yield analysts, sales operations, like podcast operations that have now transitioned to data science because it was just a natural part of the role. So I would really look into that. But that's coming more from that, like if you're in kind of a softer skill and moving on, I think I would think if you're like maybe a software engineer looking to move into data science, then it's actually probably even simpler because you've already kind of proven yourself. And I think in that way it's just like showing like that you know SQL. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think also kind of understanding the what the interviews are going to look like for each of these companies is important because it can also sort of like help you I think assess like how to tailor your own resume to like look appealing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's get into that because I think a lot of people would be very interested in like, the ways the interviews go and the differences between that. Yeah, so you said that you found out through Accenture through an internship you're doing, right? How
Mhm.
did that like advance into a role?
Um, yeah, well, so I guess how it advanced into my role at Accenture, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Like how did you interview? Like what was that
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, so again, it was very serendipitous. I had like never heard of consulting. I don't know how like a lot of people at Vanderbilt go into it, but I just like I don't know, I just hadn't heard of it. Again, like come from immigrant parents, like they don't know what consulting is. And as I mentioned, the managing director on the project in New York Life, for which I was like an intern on, he was a Vanderbilt alumni, and he had mentioned it's very serendipitous. He mentioned that Vanderbilt was doing on-campus recruiting for Accenture. Um, for the first time in like 15 years. And so he really encouraged me to apply. And I think he put in a good word for my resume to get through the system because I did not have a 3.5. I wasn't super far off, but I didn't have a 3.5, which is like typically for banking and consulting what they look at. But then I think the interviews just flowed really well. Um, I think I think one of the reasons was I remember one of my interviewers they said that they felt that I was like very humble, which I think goes to kind of show that maybe like some people like in college when they're recruiting they like want to show, oh, like I took a marketing class, I know everything. But that's like I don't know that that's necessarily like what employers want to see. I think they want to see more of like a growth mindset, like you're curious, not that you like know everything. But and then my job at Spotify, actually, I just blindly applied on LinkedIn, like no referral, nothing. I didn't expect anything to happen from it. But I think, and I know that a lot of people say that blindly applying is not a great strategy, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I think it's also strategically blindly applying, meaning I'm pretty certain that had I blindly applied into a data science role from Accenture, I don't think I would have gotten it because I think that within blind applications, they're probably looking at, I mean, hopefully they look at everyone, but they're probably prioritizing people from other tech companies because there's that kind of like, well, why would we hire someone that's never been in a tech company when I can hire someone from like Netflix that can hit the ground running immediately. I think that might be a thought process. So, but for something like the finance role, I kind of had a sense that those sort of roles pull closely from consulting companies. So I think it's a little bit of that like kind of strategic, like what kind of companies can I blindly apply for given my current background, where they might find it appealing or in that same world or in that same industry. Like, how do I leverage what I already have? Versus then if I want to break into something that feels totally new, then like the networking aspect is probably very helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I got my job off Indeed, which I never thought would happen, you know. But yeah, no, I think a big part of it is like you mentioned earlier, like tailoring the resume, you know, and like because I've also been hiring people off Indeed for a project I'm doing, and that's a big thing, like seeing it from the other side and actually realizing like that
Yeah.
you have to go through that really fast. Like you're getting tons of resumes. You have to like look and that's a big thing is realizing that like there's things that like you look at and you're like, okay, it doesn't seem like they put a lot of effort into this. It seems like, maybe they're not a good fit, but like maybe they have the same skills. It's just they're not presenting them well.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on like kind of how you tailored your resume for Spotify?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that this is well, specifically how to my resume for Spotify. One lucky thing about being in consulting is you have to go on a project every couple of months, so you're constantly updating your resume. Like you have like an internal one pager.
Mm.
So it was kind of lucky that I was like already kind of being primed to do that all the time because I absolutely like dread updating like my resume. I like editing like friends' resumes or other people's resume. I hate writing it myself. It's so time consuming. But I think that, and this is, I think, a really common thing people say, or it seems very obvious, but it's like looking at the description and the roles and responsibilities on the job that you want, and then seeing like how can you kind of not manipulate, but like maneuver your experience into like using that language. I know a lot of people really stress having quantitative measures like increased revenue by 30%. Um, I'm sure that that is really helpful, but realistically, like not every bullet point is going to be that, especially if you've had one job. Like, I don't know how many people across the companies are all increasing revenue by 30%. Like,
Yeah.
how is that possible, you know? Like I think having like I know I personally because I'm in the same boat as you. I when I do data science tech screens at Spotify, I look at their resumes too. And
Mhm.
I sometimes like if somebody has like a super quantitative like increased by X% for every single bullet, it sometimes throws me off. Sometimes it's okay to just have a couple of the bullets really more so just talk about the general kind of like the general impact and the general day to day. And I think that using some of the terms from the roles and responsibilities of the job spec like is just really helpful. I know that for myself, like when I was updating my resume to go from finance to data science within Spotify, because I had to go through the full application process, I
Mhm.
definitely I looked at the role that I was applying for and then similar roles, and I just like copy and pasted a lot of the roles and responsibilities just into a document and then like look to see where are the commonalities, like what are common things people are talking about, what's common like verbiage people are saying, because you also have to remember that the first your screen is going through a recruiter and the recruiter is typically not a data scientist, so they're themselves typically looking for certain words that that they believe have to do with the job. So I think that using those words, as long as it's, honest, like I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So yeah, that for me, just like, and I still have that repository of like bunch of sometimes if I see interesting roles in general, like where I'm like, oh, this might be a job I would one day be interested in, like I'll paste the description into that same document so I can just like take a look and see, okay, what are the commonalities across all of these roles? Like which of these kind of sentences or words like inspire leadership or like collaboration or strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, especially thinking from like a recruiter's perspective, because that's usually, who you're dealing with. But I feel like narrative is often like really underrated, like because like the stats everyone has like, oh, pandas, numpy, whatever, but like having that really good like 150 word like just bio or description that really just like captures like everything else, like why you're interested and like those little things. I think that's really important too, because I feel like that's like a lot of the time you're hit with all these like facts and skills, and it's like good to see like who's the person behind this. But yeah, so if anyone's like workshopping their like 150 word little tagline, feel free to drop in the chat, and if we have time, maybe we can take a look. But yeah, so I'd like to kind of go back to the interview thing again, because I think that's it's really interesting, and companies have very different processes. But I've heard some rumors about like consulting companies having like really interesting like games or challenges to try to like see if people can problem solve. Was there any like fun challenge that you can share?
Wow, so that would have been like 6 or 7 years ago at this point.
Okay.
There were no trick questions like what you're talking about, like the guesstimating. Like there were no trick questions for Accenture. That's what I loved actually. What I get really nervous. Like I have like pretty bad like performance anxiety, and which like it's just like awful when you have to code live. Like I hate that.
Oh
I
my
hate
God.
it so much.
So scary.
And for consulting companies, you have to do case studies. But what Accenture did, which was like so beautiful, was they gave you a piece of paper and then you read it, and then they were like, all right, turn it over and just write down your thoughts for 5 minutes, and then we'll talk about it. And I was like, that is amazing, because not a single other company I interviewed with did that. Like I interviewed when I was in college with like FactSet, which is like in the finance space but not banking. And I think they asked me something about like cars, like the number of cars in the country or something like that. And like I don't drive because I'm from New York City, so it was like awful for me. I was like, I just like it was like it was something about like the price, like how much do you think the total like automotive like insurance industry is? And I was like, I just have no idea what insurance prices are, car prices. But yeah, I've I've heard that companies are going away, like doing away with questions like that, though.
Mhm.
I have not encountered any since like 2015. Um,
Gosh.
yeah, I
Yeah.
heard even Google has kind of stopped with those. Yeah, like market size and guesstimating questions.
Yeah, those are annoying. But yeah, so how about Spotify? Were there like multiple, kind of interview levels you had to go through, and like live coding or any of that?
Yeah, so for the finance role, no, it was just like a lot more conversational, where you kind of meet with members of the team, and it's not purely conversational. Like there's more questions like to test the way that you're thinking, like
Mm.
or how like or can you tell me like I remember a question I got asked that I really liked was like, can you tell me about a time that your curiosity like led to impact or discovery at work? And I was like, oh, that's a really good question. So it was like some pretty like not tough behavioral questions, but more than just like the standard ones. So that was what I experienced there. But and yeah, and I think they even though they didn't test my like coding skills, they tested my like data savviness.
Mm.
More like with that curiosity question, like, oh, can you tell me about like a time that you use data to like inform a strategy or change your perspective, or like when the data didn't really match what the stakeholder wanted, how did you deal with that? So questions like that. And then for data science, there was a technical screen, so it's about 45 minutes of like live coding and discussion, and then like a take home presentation, which a lot of companies do take home presentations. I've noticed with companies that they like some companies will do take home presentations. They'll like send you a hackering test and they'll give you like 2, 3 hours. Some kind of do this like hybrid where they'll send you like 5 questions and you'll have to send back like a notebook with your responses. But if for specifically for like the presentation, like if I could give any advice to people that are doing presentations, I think that presentations typically, from what I've seen, they come after technical screens. And so I think a big part of the presentation and what I see as sometimes lacking when I'm on the interview side and seeing these presentations is like the storytelling aspect. Like
Mm.
really like how do you like instead of just like delving into like accuracy or like oh like like I did like ridge or like stuff like that like that or these like really kind of very small, not small details because they're important, but they are like details. Like start
Mm.
off with the broad picture, like what is the point of this? Why are we here today? Like, what are we analyzing? What are the implications? Like, I think that presentations are often testing that as much or more than they are just like your technical capabilities.
Yeah, and there's like I feel like there's a lot of soft skills that really go into those interviews as well because like you said, only maybe one or two are technical and the rest are like, talking, explaining like your motivations and your interests and all this. And so do you have any like did you prepare for that? Like did you prepare like answers to those questions or like how did you kind of, prep the soft skills
Yeah.
part into that?
I mean, I will be honest, I did not prep, but I definitely recommend prepping. I
Yeah.
really recommend prepping. I did prep. Well, so this is one thing that I learned like at very beginning of Accenture because like every time we would go on to a new client, if they were a public client, which I think usually or public company, like my manager would say like make sure to read the 10K before we get on client site. And the 10K is like the financial report. Like you could find it on for any public company, you could find it on their website. You just like Google their 10K. Also, a lot of earning calls are like recorded on YouTube if you don't feel like reading through it. But I found that reading through that before my first interview at Spotify was really helpful because I knew from the beginning what metrics are important. So, like, for example, like MAU and DAU, like monthly active user and daily active user, like those those are obviously important to Spotify, right? Or to any like subscription based company. However, if you're nervous in an interview and you've never seen the word like MAU and someone asks you, so what do you think are important metrics that Spotify tracks? Like for me, like it's not gonna come to my mind. Like I'm gonna like freak out. So I think that familiarizing. So this is like not as much, I guess, tips for behavioral, but it's still part of the behavioral part where they ask you about like your interest in the company or where do you see the company direction going or why this is a team appealing. I think like reading 10K and the 10K and listening to the earnings and just seeing if it's like if it especially if it's like a bigger company, like what's going on in the news or looking at their Twitter page or looking at their LinkedIn page, I think could be really helpful because then you could speak the lingo. And I think that's like I think interviewers like find that pretty impressive because a lot of people like don't do that research and they're not familiar with that terminology. And then so if you get kind of asked a question like that even during a presentation or a technical screen like oh well we did this like analysis like in SQL. Well, why do you think that it matters, right? You can kind of immediately recall, okay, well, I heard during the earnings report that the CEO is really focused on growth right now over like profit, so I'm going to focus my answer in the context of like increasing our user base. Or, oh, I see that this company is really focused on um, kind of like cornering the Gen Z audience. Well, like let me factor that into one of my answers. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great tip 'cause I feel like a lot of people wouldn't even like think to like, prepare in that way. But yeah, like I've learned that the hard way also where I've gone to interviews and they've been like, oh, so, what do you think of our projects? Or like, like forgot to forgot to
Right.
look at the projects. But yeah, that's really good. I think that's like really going the extra mile to, be prepared. And also the whole thing is you're coming in to help solve their problems, and like being really familiar with like the overall challenges that will be broken down into like, the tasks of a data scientist is really good to know.
Yeah.
But I'd love to get more into machine learning. 'Cause like you mentioned, that you kind of first came across at Accenture, like doing kind of some simple modeling. And then you got into it more at Spotify. So, like, what kind of models do you start with, and what kind of stuff are you doing now?
Yeah, so well, the modeling that I was initially mentioning at Accenture wasn't machine learning modeling. It's more like financial modeling, which is why I was saying it wasn't as like impressive or robust as machine learning modeling. I'm definitely interested in it. I'm still trying to kind of discern the difference between machine learning modeling and like data science. Right. And that like where is kind of like that line. So when I was at Accenture, we did like clustering, like k-mean stuff, or we did like regressions. It was a lot more simple, like trying to identify like which features are important, or like what's like like what is impacting revenue the most, or like how do we project like what the price is going to look like, things like that. So I don't know if that's considered machine learning. Some people say regression is machine learning. I haven't had the opportunity to work with neural nets or anything like that yet. I'm not sure if you have, but I have not gotten that exposure yet. But what I find actually interesting is not doing the coding piece as much, but as like working on it from more of like a product perspective. So for example, like a Spotify, like in the Spotify context, like if we're testing different algorithms, like different recommendation algorithms, right? I'm not responsible for those machine learning algorithms. Those are the machine learning engineers and they put them together, but I'm helping set up the A/B tests and try to scope out, what users do we want to target and what do these results mean and how do we like extrapolate them.
Gotcha. And just, I don't know anything about how it works, but I assume there's some clustering happening at Spotify. I don't know if you're like kind of familiar with kind of the general models being used or.
Yeah, I mean, there's everything going on. It's really dependent on like what specifically like you're talking about. Like even within the recommendation algorithms, there's so many different ones, so many different teams all using different algorithms and different forms of recommendation with different inputs and different prioritizations and weighting. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so we got a question about composing a case study, and I assume this is maybe for a portfolio, for an interview. Any tips on kind of like what to highlight, like what's important to point out, and how to summarize it, and if you have like a template or a way you usually go about this.
So I don't have like a template or anything that is that kind of prescriptive. Again, feel free to reach out to me because again, I think it's like general advice is great, but I think I could probably help you better if you just reach out to me directly. I think that so I'm reading the message here on the side. Okay, so it's for a portfolio. Okay. I guess I'm trying to understand what exactly this person means by like a case study for their portfolio. Like the way that I would interpret that is kind of based off of like work that they've done themselves. Like for example, I was just looking over my friend's like user research portfolio and that's like what she had within hers. So I think similarly to her user research portfolio for data science, I think it's just like the first step is like, why does this matter? Like, what did you do? Why does this matter? Like, kind of like the TLDR. I like forecasted this to understand this, or like researched, or like like ran a survey, to like predict X. Like it's like what is like why should you care? I think that's the most important thing. Like that's what you should have in bold or like in the TLDR, and like why should you care? Why does it matter? What is the impact? And then like how did you actually go about doing it? But I think that that's like what catches the person's eyes as opposed to like a bunch of technical jargon at the beginning. But it's like why should you care? I think is like really really important and like what would make somebody's portfolio stand out to me. But definitely, yeah, feel free to reach out if you have a question about your specific. I can help maybe edit it in a way that I think would be appealing.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really good point because I feel like as like a lot of like programmers or data scientists, like you're working on these like very zoomed in aspects of like a huge problem, like increasing revenue, and you break that down to like solve these little problems. But I think it's really important to have that like domain driven design mindset of like what is like this company's like main concerns. How does that break down to like their main problem right now, and then kind of addressing things from that angle, like who are the stakeholders? Why is answering this project important to them? And also I think an interesting one is like why I mean, like why do I have an interest? Why am I the one to like provide an answer? And so I think especially for like personal projects, it's really important.
Exactly. And I think that's the distinction that I would love to know, like for the specific person or anyone who has a question. I think there's definitely a difference between when you're doing this case study portfolio based off of work that you've done versus like what work that you've done for a company versus work like personal project. Because obviously if you're doing it for a company, like you're doing it because you have to do it. But if
Yeah.
you're doing it for, you know, as a side project, I think why you're interested in it is important. But I think like the main thing that will catch the person's eyes, kind of like why does something like this matter, like for the domain, for the company, like what, like why should we like even read this in the first place, and then kind of dive into technical and why you specifically are interested in it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Another thing I'd like to address, which you kind of mentioned a few things surrounding this, but like a big part of these jobs is working with people, especially like consulting and all that. And I know you said you have an interest in like human behavior and all that, but how has that come into play in like surprising ways? Do you have any tips for people who are maybe like introverts, or you said you're also like sometimes performance anxiety and like kind of dealing with the human side of like, you know, this interview process and all that?
Yeah, well, I think that what I've noticed with the data science field, not necessarily the consulting field, but with the data science field, is that people are like very, very humble.
Mm,
And everyone feels like they don't know anything, which is really nice environment to be in because like I'm on a team called the economics team, and it's me, my teammate, and then three economic PhDs. So I'm like, and like my teammate, he's not as like quantitative, he's more on like the market research side. So out of
mm,
the four of us that are like quantitative, like I am by far the worst, like just in every aspect that you can imagine. So like from that perspective, and I think, but it's never like held against me. Like there's never any like irritation or anger because I think I have like they see that okay, I have the desire to learn this, and I am interested in what this person has to say, and I'm like appreciating their time. So I think your question, like kind of from like a day-to-day work perspective rather than interview perspective, but I think it applies everywhere, is like I think having like being inquisitive and having humility, I just think it takes you such a long way because people love to feel like needed, I think. So I think that anybody's willing to explain things to you. So and I think that for example, one type of modeling that I do at Spotify right now is called causal inference. So that's like it's not ML, it's like more stats, data science. And I think causal like somebody I saw somebody developed an internal Spotify causal package, and I reached out to them and like set up a one-on-one and asked them to walk me through it. So I really think that reaching out to people and like developing relationships is really important, and being like kind and humble and grateful and inquisitive, it will take you a longer way than just being good. Like
mhm.
it just will. Like I've really realized that, and I see some people are writing in the chat like that they're introverted. Like I I'm not necessarily introverted, but I hate presenting. I don't like talking in big groups, but I love like one-on-one settings. I think introverts can actually connect better in one-on-one settings than extroverts because introverts like have really good listening skills and they're like deeply curious. So I think like setting up a lot of one-on-ones is so helpful, and it really builds relationships. And for example, like I've recently been really interested in user research, and like I just didn't have the chance to do that in my work. So I just like I attended all hands, which a lot of companies have. Like all hands are like, oh, this like business unit is having a presentation. I just like attended it and like waited for someone within user research to like present, and waited till someone presented really resonated with me, and then I would reach out to them and I would say, hey, this is really interesting, like this was a fantastic presentation. I learned so much. Like I would love to grab 30 minutes with you just like to learn a little bit more about you. And that way you're like really making the person feel like appreciated and seen, and making them feel like less nervous for the next time they have to present in front of a bunch of people. So I really, really think that reaching out to people one-on-one and setting up 30-minute chats, like the days are so monotonous, and like COVID is so lonely. Like I think people really will appreciate just having the opportunity to talk to somebody who's interested in them and interested in their path. And by doing that more and more, you'll start to go to meetings and realize, oh, I've already talked to all of these 5 people individually. I'm now comfortable with them. I can now speak up in meetings, because I definitely have huge issues talking in meetings that have like more than 3 people, unless I'm comfortable with everyone. And I think that for introverts, getting comfortable with everyone could be through these like personal kind of personal one-on-ones. And also it really just, it helps you learn like what's out there, because I think something like you and I chatted about a little bit before this is like, and you kind of brought up, like there's so many different roles that all, especially as a data scientist, I think is such a versatile role. Like you can go into software engineering, data engineering, machine learning engineering. You can go into strategy. You can go into product management, user research, quantitative research. Every week there's a new title that I'm seeing, like decision intelligence. And I think just like talking to people, like understanding more about their craft and their day to day, like I think it could be so helpful, and it can also be really helpful in kind of giving you the jargon that you're going to need for
Mhm.
your rest for these interviews that you have. And
Yeah.
I think, I know that your initial question was also about like how do you kind of work on these people skills in interviews. I think one great thing about interviews is often they are one-on-one. So if you are introverted, like just really making the like just making it conversational and making sure that you're coming with like well-informed questions, and ask the people like what are they curious about, what you know what surprised you about this job, like what did you went in thinking one thing, how has it evolved in the last year, like people I feel like are really excited to answer thought-provoking questions, and then I think once they get comfortable and warm and smile, like you can ease up as well, and then it can flow a little better.
Yeah, like when I was interviewing, I actually had this like posted note of like, because they always are like, "What questions do you have for us?" And then like the first two times I was like caught off guard and like, oh, you know. And so then I kept this like post note like right next so I could like casually like look when I was interviewing, because like
Yeah.
I had like, what are the biggest challenges your company faces? Like, what are big things in the industry? What are things that like you'll be hoping to do in like 5 to 10 years? Like, where do you see your company going? Like, because I feel like that's really helpful, and like that's something a lot of people forget is like that yeah, that you should bring that
Yeah.
also.
And
But yeah, one thing I was going to say in terms of meeting people, because I've also like been doing a lot of, especially when I was like interviewing, doing a lot of like that 15-30 minute chat, like following up, like I would catch a virtual event and I would like very much like this, and I would follow up. And but the big thing is having a clearly defined ask, because I think that's where it's like difficult to continue the conversation, is like the person being reached out to, is if someone's just like, oh, I'm interested with your work, I'm in the same industry, and it's like, whereas a question of like, oh, I'm very interested in this one project you did, I'm doing this, is there any chance we could jump in a call and you give me feedback? Or, and I feel like that has a lot greater success, because people, it's easier to like answer, like know that there's a goal to that conversation.
100%. And I think when it's internally, right, like you're at a company and you're more like, how do I thrive here and how do I build these relationships and like that people skill
Mhm.
baselines, like it's definitely a lot easier. Like people are not going to ignore you on Slack in their company, right? So I think with that you can you could be slightly like more relaxed or general, although like you mentioned and I mentioned as well, like catching someone's presentation and being like, what, I loved like this like surveyed, I'm just on the user research track right now in my mind. It's like, I love this like survey design that you did. I'm really interested in it. Can I grab some time? And I think like in terms of reaching out to like, like in situations like this or like over LinkedIn and stuff, it's like, I hope people like don't get discouraged. Like just send it. Like my best friend's boyfriend just like got a job at a top law firm because he just spammed so many people, like, and
Yeah.
really like just like saw someone liked something and messaged them, and so many people didn't respond, some people were actually rude, but one person responded and now he got this job. And it's like just trying. And yeah, like you're saying, like those specific asks are definitely a little bit better. Like I, on my profile it says like data scientist, like I think econometrics on it, and I've had some people, I tried to respond to most people, but like some of the people I've had the most engaging conversation with are like, oh, I'm really interested in the field of econometrics. I don't exactly know what it means, but I took a few classes like it. Like, do you want to chat? Because that's also beneficial for me. Like, how much do I know about econometrics? Like, like I would love to know what you know. Like, what books are you interested in? Like, who are you reading, or who are you reading or listening to? And then just a quick thing to what you said before about the questions on the sticky note. I think that's a super good idea. I think the only thing I would add to some of the questions that you said is like, again, make some of them a little bit more personal than just about the company, because I think having a mix of that is good, because you don't want to get too personal in the interview, but like one or two questions about like, where do you see your career growing, or what excites you, I think really gets people like jazzed about talking. And I'll just to say that when I was first interviewing, it was really hard for me to come up with questions too. But when you work after a couple years, you just know what questions to ask because you're like, all right, these are the pet peeves I have in my current role. I need to make sure this isn't happening at this role. So you end up having more questions to ask than people have time to answer. So that
Yeah,
was
yeah, that's the good news about interviewing is that it gets easier. You know what I mean? Like even if it's still scary, like at least you kind of know what's coming and all that. But yeah, no, the follow up on that, there's so many things that like I feel like you can only learn by talking to people. Like you can read all the Medium articles you want, but like there's things happening in the industry that like you would just have no idea. Like you can read all about the way things work, but like what are people actually doing? You have to like, have that conversation with them. But I feel like I've taken so much value of like things I've heard in conversations that I can take to other conversations and all that kind of stuff.
exactly.
But
And
yeah,
and you can connect ideas, and you can even connect people. Like it's just like I just feel like it's like building like a network, but not even like in the superficial sense, just like in a very genuine sense of like-minded and like interesting people.
exactly. Yeah. And some groups I found very helpful were like women in data science focused because I felt like it was kind of very approachable in a way of like really kind of like encouraging newcomers and like the way the community worked. But do you have any like communities that you're part of that like helped you get there or like anything that you're involved with?
Yeah, so I think that in a sense, because I didn't jump immediately into data science, but I kind of like transitioned like when I was already at a company. I feel like some of the things of like building your own GitHub profile or like, joining communities, like I don't think that I didn't get as much involved in that because I just kind of like leveraged like internally Spotify had like a data science community. And
Mm.
so if you do take the route of, going to a company and a not data focused role, but it's a company that has like a pretty good data infrastructure, there's going to be a lot of those communities in there. There's going to be a data science Slack channel. There's going to be like data science like meetups and things like that. So I would definitely recommend that. I remember I went to a couple like Tableau New York meetups, which I thought were pretty cool.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do definitely want to get involved in like the data community a little bit more. I kind of I do like volunteering for like other things. Like I really like to volunteer with kind of like students and like and children, especially from like underprivileged like backgrounds. So I've focused my kind of spare time more on that than like on the data community. But yeah, I think that's a really really great advice, especially like women in data science group or just like one that's like very supportive. And yeah, I feel like I'm like part of a couple like listservs online, so I can find some stuff. So if anyone reaches out with any tips, I can send a couple their way.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we have time for one or two more questions, so feel free to drop your last questions in the chat. But kind of following up on one from Macy, in terms of like thinking about like taking a project and like something that you want to put in your resume, do you have any tips for maybe like finding data for that project or just kind of getting started in general? I know you kind of talked about that earlier, but maybe more focused on like starting a project and
Yeah. So I actually came across a really good post the other day. So I I don't it's somewhere. So I think you said Macy, if you're on LinkedIn or you want to email me, please do so and I'll send you like a link. I thought it was really insightful because it said some great places to get data off of. And what I remember from like just thinking about it was like a lot of it had to do with like web scraping. I think Zillow, web scraping, Craigslist was really interesting. Um, and like web scraping Twitter, I think is pretty cool. I know a lot of people do like Kaggle data sets, but there's recommendations that they're not as real compared to like because they're all clean and perfect, stuff like that. So I feel like Craigslist and like Yelp and Twitter and Zillow, like they have so much going on. It'd be interesting. I know I have a lot of friends that are really into I have a few friends that are really into crypto and they're not doing this, they're just doing it for themselves, but they're actually building like a trading bot like based off of crypto data and they're again using APIs to kind of to get that information and then like do what they want with it. They're trying to predict and use machine learning. And it's like above my head.
yeah.
Or I have a friend who he loves this game called Liar's Dice, and he created like a way to do that from like a software engineering data science perspective, like an online version of it. My other best friend just built like a chess engine because he is super into chess. So I think really finding like what you're interested in is super important. Like I remember in 2020, just like at the height of everything going on, I was like, I really want to get all these like GoFundMe links into a repository and then send it out to my network, like for us, like for especially for a lot of like BLM focused organizations. And so even I didn't want to do it from like a data perspective, but I was like, why not? Like it's gonna be faster this way. So I scraped GoFundMe for like links and like organized it in an interesting way. So I think like coming up with like something that you're interested in, or like this is a project I was going to do but I didn't do, is I was going to so I was going to scrape Wikipedia to get data from The Bachelor, and then I was going to see if I could predict like who wins The Bachelor, just based off of data. Like, but web scraping Wikipedia is like awful for me. Like it's just like so much work. But yeah, so it's silly, but I think something that you're interested in knowing about will really keep you motivated to keep going when inevitably it gets very difficult. Or then and also then like if you're interested in a specific company or in a specific like industry, I think doing a domain focused project, like I think you mentioned before, is really good. A lot of people that apply to Spotify, they do some sort of like Spotify based projects and they get their data from the Spotify API. So
Yeah.
the APIs are super, super useful.
No, that's great. That's very helpful. And I think that's also a great point to end on. I know we have more questions, but if you want to hear more, like Felicia said, you can reach out to her, and we'll also have this on YouTube. And yeah, feel free to like our page so you can see our future events. We have ones every week where we bring on amazing speakers like Felicia. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming. Our LinkedIn's are in the event description, so you can go ahead and connect with any future questions. And yeah, thank you everyone for all your questions and engagement. It's been a great session. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you.